Hello and welcome to my session. My name is PetarPuskarich, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the current state of Smartport for the Apple II at present. Some of the caveats, some of the different options you have to actually bring Smartport onto your machines, as well as how to do it rather cheaply, and also a couple of the devices that you could be supporting off of them. It's been an interesting about year and a half as far as this particular topic is. The development in it has been pretty rapid, and most things are, let's say, 80% working the way they should be, and I'll discuss some of those with the different devices here in a couple minutes. Anywhere from being you have to hit Control Open Apple Reset on an Apple IIe to get things to boot always, to you have to update firmware on different devices to get things to work with the newer cards like a Yellowstone, and even then there's some new things that are coming out that still need to be patched to work with that card. So Smartport as a protocol is also still being, let's say, I guess learned by the developers that are working on these projects. A lot of it comes down to the protocol and the timing of the actual Smartport packets, and also different IDs that are on the system per device as well, and when those are requested and how they're presented onto the bus. It all seems to make a difference. One thing I can start out with and basically just say that, well, what works perfectly? Well, what works perfectly so far in my experience is if you're using a real Lyron card on an Apple II or IIe, 2 Plus, yeah, or if you use an Apple II GS with its built-in Smartport. The devices seem to work pretty well with it, at least the ones that I have. One of the devices I do not own is the W drive, but I plan to buy one of those at some point in time. I also do not own a Booty, but I believe it does things a little bit differently since it's a slot card itself. So far, the devices that I have, and I'll be showing those off here in a little bit, include the floppy EMU from Big Mess of Wires, as well as his Yellowstone card that just came out. Also have the latest prototype for the FujiNet Zero, basically, for the Apple. And I also have what they call the Smartport SD device, which was updated to work with the Yellowstone recently by Robert Justice. But as of about an hour ago, it looks like that functionality quit working for some reason, at least in an Apple IIe Platinum. I will have to go back and double check and see if it still works on a regular Apple IIe. So maybe there's some other timing that's going on there that's causing that to fail. But anyway, without further ado, let me show off a few of the devices and systems of what you can actually do. Let me transition this across. All right, so one of the things, basically, the, say, protocol standard will be essentially this device, which is a Lyron card. This one's my Lyron 508 and has ASCO 508. I also have one that says ASCO 007. So who knows, maybe that might be the James Bond edition. But that card is basically what you would use to normally boot up a Smartport device if you have one. They are getting few and far between, and they are getting expensive to buy on eBay if you can locate them. Past that, other devices that were out for Smartport includes this nice little gem, which is going to be the Apple II 3.5 disc controller card. And its claim to fame basically is it is the only HD card that I'm aware of that will handle 3.5-inch HD floppies on an Apple II. You can do it with an AE card or an AE drive on the Apple II GS, but you would still have, for regular Apple HD Super Drive, you'd have to still use the 3.5-inch control card for that. And it's also a Smartport standard as well, since it has its own swim chip on it. All right, next up is going to be All right, so we can go into how you can get SmartPort on your machine. And there are a few different ways that you can do that. And one of the nice, simpler ways is this tiny little card by KBook or MFA2 Mafia, which is, I think, the same people. But I think these are about like $19. And this one has what was called the V3 code base on it, which basically gives you the ability to redirect the SmartPort protocol from essentially any slot you would like where this card resides onto a DIS2 controller in slot 6. And we can share that in a little bit. And then to go along with that methodology, if you can't get a hold of that card, and they're hard to get a hold of right now due to just production delays and whatnot, and the fact that they have to come in from overseas. So if you cannot get one of those cards, one of the things you can do is grab one of these cards, which is going to be a super serial card that I have. Oh, here we go. And unfortunately, this particular card, I have to swap chips here in a second. There we go. Basically, it's a standard super serial card, but you replace out the EEPROM, and it's a 2K EEPROM. Unfortunately, this would be the version 1 version of the do-it-yourself SmartPort ROM, which means that in order to get SmartPort on your Apple II, this card has to go in slot 5 only, and then your DIS2 still goes in slot 6. And it pretty much works pretty well, with a small caveat if you're not booting from the SmartPort port. So that's the super serial card. Then the next jump up from that is going to be what's also popular, which is basically changing the ROM out on a old Grappler Plus printer card. And you can do that. You change it out with the PROM. It's a 4K EEPROM in this case. And this one is running version 4A of the SmartPort code. The 4A does not exist that I'm aware of for the actual KBook little tiny card. I believe at some point, or it may be out by now, that GG Labs, I believe, will have the a version of it that has like the 4A code with it as well, whenever that gets done. And that's been tested. All right, so the benefit of this particular version and card is that if you do not boot from slot 5 that has a SmartPort running on it, say you boot from slot 7 in this case to a real physical ProDOS floppy, if you're not running the 4A code, it'll actually stall during loading for a while, and sometimes it'll crash when it's trying to load in the SmartPort coding. 4A fixes that, and it acts basically normally again. So you kind of really do want the 4A code base if you're booting from other slots besides your SmartPort. Okay, then basically on either of those solutions, what you're going to end up having is you're going to have a DIS2 controller of some sort inside your Apple II, and it can be the standard DIS2 with the IDC20 plugs, or it can be the slightly newer card. Let me get this back. There it is, with the DB19 on the end, so you can use that as well. But I caution you, if you're using any of these SmartPort things that are using your DIS2 card as a carryway, you do need to actually snip, there you go, pin 12, and that's that red wire here on this one. Because if you're using a floppy EMU on it, over time, basically it will burn out the floppy EMU, and you really don't want that. Now, it does not affect any other devices that I am aware of, because that particular pin 12 for the other emulators usually becomes a no connection point. And that pin generally is only used for actual real disk 2 as well. So when you go into SmartPort, that kind of like the 3.5-inch drive layout, that pin is just not used, and it's usually not connected. So there's no harm, no foul there. Okay, and then finally we can get over to the new guy on the block, which is going to be the Big Mess of Wires Yellowstone card. And this is what it looks like. So I can get that up close enough. There we go. So it's a nice little card, produced very well. And I bought my kit with the extra cables and the converters, so the IDC20 to DB19 converters, which come in very handy for actually setting up all different kinds of different devices that if you want to connect them to the newer card. If you want to connect to a standard IDC20 controller, you can still do that. And there's the standard. You can still use it and then use the IDC20 connections on the top. But again, that still goes in slot 6, and your ROM card normally will go in slot 5, but it can go, if you're using essentially version 3 and above, you can put it in any slot. Okay, so now let's get to, I guess, a couple devices that you could, in theory, hook up to your Apple II. So, the standard one that was out for, the very first ever, I believe, is still the Unidisc 3.5, and this will work on all the different solutions since it's SmartPort protocol. I did have a little bit of difficulty getting it to work with the Yellowstone card, to be honest, but that seems to be a quirk where you need to do Control Open Apple Reset, and then it'll actually boot it. It's kind of strange, and I'm not sure exactly why that is happening that way. And it also affects the next little device I'm going to show you. Okay, let me separate it from its core. And this was one I included last year when it was brand new. All right, so this one, get it in here. Let's see if this makes sense. This is essentially what they call the SmartPort SD card. This particular design is from Rodney Ross, and it was a remix based kind of from some work that, let's say, Catherine Stark, Robert Justice, and there was the original group that built the very first set of them. I believe his name was Andrea, but I could be wrong. I can look that back up. But what what Rodney added to this device are the little LEDs down the middle here, which reflect which boot drive is currently mapped in the SmartPort of the 4 that are in use. And you can have up to 4 different partitions. You copy the PO files or HDV files over to a SD card, and that's where they boot from. It's a really handy device because it kind of just works. Except on the Yellowstone tonight, for whatever reason, on my Platinum 2E here. That will need to be do some more research. And I will share that here in a second. And we're doing great on time. All right, so as far as the SmartPort devices that I've got to hook up to these, here's well, I'll get that last, actually. And here's the quintessential one that basically a lot of people are using, which is the Big Mess of Wires floppy EMU. If the camera actually gets that, I get it right across. Mine's a revision B. He has revision C out now as well. That has some extra little features from what I'm aware of. I'm running mine without the case because of all the cable swaps that I do with it for different testing. And one thing I have found is that the floppy EMU across the different SmartPort cards and hookup possibilities, the slower the SD card, the better for the floppy EMU, which is kind of bizarre, but that's what I've been finding. It also appears if you push the floppy EMU too hard I/O rate-wise, so like if you do a verification from ProDOS under, say, like Copy2 Plus 8.4, it will basically start throwing bad blocks on the verify, which other devices just do not do. So I think there's either a buffer issue there, or he does some timing things just a little bit differently that happen every now and then, and that will show up sometimes, especially if you're using Total Replay, which is the 32 meg volume with the whole slew of games on it that everyone likes to run, with their SmartPort, because, well, it's 32 megs of everything almost that you'd ever want to play with. It will actually cause crashes and screen corruptions every now and then. So something to watch out for. One very interesting thing to note is that, again, on the Apple II GS with its native SmartPort, and also on the Lyron card, those particular traits do not manifest. So you can actually validate the floppy EMU against a Lyron, it'll be just perfectly fine. If you validate it against the Yellowstone card or the other solutions, the different DIY SP cards, it'll throw blocks. And they're not actually bad, they're just being reported as bad because of apparently they're missing something in the protocol timing is my guess, whether it's buffer related or timing. So that's some of the things I've noticed going on with SmartPort. And then finally, the very last Apple SmartPort device that I have that I'm really happy to show, actually, is this is a Rev Zero Fuji Apple. And let me throw it up here. And it's a standard DB19 SmartPort port. It's got Wi-Fi, and I believe it's a ESP32. It's has an onboard SD card if you want to load from the SD card as well. And the really cool part about this is this gives multiple devices to SmartPort for the very first time, at least implemented for the first time. It's part of the protocol, but it's never really been done by Apple or anybody that I'm aware of. So we have a network device, a character device, and then also the block devices for the protocol. There will be some more demos on Friday of the device with Jeff Piepmeyer, and I'll be doing some of the demos while he's giving the presentation on this particular card. So what I want to basically show is let's hook some of this stuff up. So first off, let me take a DB19 and throw that in slot 6. So that's a standard 5 1/4 controller. All right. And then I'm going to put the Fuji on it. I'll run through that quick, and then I'll also do the SmartPort SD. So we have that connected there. And as I knock over everything, beautiful. All right. So there's a little bit better view of the Apple II for now. Well, as I block it. All right, so there's the FujiNet attached to the Disk 2 card. So then let's go put the Grappler card here in slot 5. All right, so make sure nothing grounded out. So there's that there. And with that, that's really all we need to do. So let's turn it on. And then with this, it's still, I'll do a control reset, because normally you have to do a control reset or control open Apple reset, depending on what machines you're using, in order to have it time enough and also for the ROM to load if you're not booting from a different slot. So let me move this back around. Oops. So let's do PR number 5. And then this will be loading up a config file off the Smartport. So we have network devices and then these 4 FujiNet disk, basically your standard 4 Smartport ports. Hit return. And so let's just go and see what happens. Oh, look, we can actually go to an online data store. This is fujinet.online, their server, and it's running a tiny TFNS or TNFS server. So it's really lightweight, and you can host all kinds of little files from it. So they have one up on DigitalOcean. So we're actually hitting the remote instance. And let's go ahead and just pull up Total Replay. So we got it. We got the load. Let's load it as read-only. And it says, go ahead and boot. So now we do that. We'll do the control reset after it's loaded and do PR number 5. And there you go. So hopefully this will start loading here. And I had an issue. Yep, there it goes. So it's loading completely off of the volumes and DigitalOcean. And then it'll go into the attract mode and whatnot. And you can say, hit W, and it should, yep, there goes the wargle. Or if you hit escape, it'll go back. So it loads the full, and it will access by block the information that it needs to pull in. So that's pretty cool. So let's hit D and see if we can just load a game. And droll, and then we hit return. And it'll go and access that off of that 32 meg volume in the cloud. And that's all over Wi-Fi configurable as well. So it's going against my local Wi-Fi, then out over the internet. And it, yep, pulled in the game. So there you go. All right, so let's go ahead and drop off that for a second. And then I want to show you the same thing off of local SD card off of the Smartport SD. Get back. There we go. So the Smartport SD, and that's going to plug directly into the DB19 port. All right, I'll hang that off the back out of the way. And then we basically just boot that up. And it's going to do the same thing because it's going to try to do an auto search and try to do, basically, it's trying to read this slot 6, and it can't because we need to actually pull it from the Smartport, which is PR number 5. And lo and behold, there it pops right up, goes back into our Total Replay. Things just work really, really slick. Let's go from that one, and then I think finally, with the amount of time I got left here, let me pull these cards out, and I can show you the difference on the Yellowstone card if it decides to play nice. So on the Yellowstone card, I'm going to put the same one I just had there, which is the Smartport SD. We're going to throw the Yellowstone in slot 5 by itself, and then we're going to boot. And interestingly enough, it doesn't like auto boot in this mode with that card. And that's the thing with the floppy EMU, it will actually auto boot. So do Control Open Apple Reset, and here's where it'll actually do the boot. It's probably something with the way the Yellowstone is searching for drives or looking for that ID byte or something. I think there still needs to be a little bit more of engineering done to figure out exactly how to make all these interactions consistent. That's one of the frustrating things I've been having testing all these is trying to figure out, okay, is it broken, is it not broken, or I'm just not doing the right magic salute to make it work. So there's Smartport SD off of a Yellowstone, and it works very well. Okay, so get that loaded, make sure the access is done. All right, so let me remove that. And finally, I will then hook up me see, I need to find its cable end. Okay, we'll steal that back from the FujiNet. And then we'll connect that in via the DB19 and DB19 male-female. And then this is for the floppy EMU. We'll boot it, and you'll notice that this time it actually did the auto boot off the floppy EMU for the same image. So obviously there's something a little different going on, and most likely because Big Mess of Wires basically developed both products. So between the two, they seem to be working pretty well. The only issue I've had with SmartPort with these two products together is still the fact that if I do a ProDOS volume verify, if I put in a very fast SD card, it'll actually blow even more invalid blocks during that check, which they're not actually invalid. It's just there's something wrong with the data stream as it's pulling it off, whether it's timing or something else going on there. But yeah, that's pretty much a very fast walkthrough of SmartPort and what's available for it. I will continue to provide any new updates to the SmartPort DIY SP as I get them. And Wang Young is the brainchild behind the fixes as I'm finding them and reporting them back to him, is making some of these work even better. And again, the 4A code set for the DIY SP4A, that EEPROM basically allows you to boot without drive hesitation from a different slot. So if you're booting from your CFFA 3000 or a 5 1/4 floppy drive, physical, and then jumping across to see your SmartPort ports, it fixes the issue with the hang or stalling during boot that you would see with version 1 and version 2 and version 3. Version 1 is the only one that fits on the Super Serial card, and version 3 is the only one released so far, the latest one released for the KBOO HK SmartPort ROM card. So then 4A for the Grappler Plus replacements. And that's the one I actually do recommend, and I can include those files as well. Again, I guess I would like to thank you for sitting through the presentation, and hopefully you'll have a little more information on SmartPort in general. And please ask many questions as you want, and I'll be around for a little bit. Thank you very much.